Good day. It has attracted almost no attention, but over the last couple of days, a delegation from the US State Department visited northeast Syria, a part of Syria which is controlled by the Kurdish militia, backed by supposedly 900 US Special Forces troops, though the number of US troops there is probably much greater. This is one area of Syria controlled by the US military. The other is Al-Tanf, a base near the Jordanian border, which has enabled the United States to maintain a presence not just in the border, but in certain areas of central Syria. So far as one can tell, this US delegation did not visit Al-Tanf, but went instead to northeast Syria, where it had discussions with the Kurdish authorities there. Now, what we know about this trip is very patchy, but it seems that the delegation from the US State Department was led by Joey Hood, who is the Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, and that he promised the Syrian Kurds that the United States would keep up its support for them, would maintain its current troop levels in northeast Syria, and would provide stabilization assistance to them, which had been frozen by the previous Trump administration. Donald Trump, of course, had consistently wanted to withdraw US troops from Syria, and we've now received information, which I'm going to discuss in more detail in a video which I shall do shortly, that he had actually intended to pull out troops from Syria as well as Afghanistan, and also, by the way, from Germany in the last weeks of his administration, but that these attempts by him to do that were torpedoed as a result of opposition by the uniformed military in the Pentagon. So, in a sense, what Hoey was doing was telling the Kurds that these policies of that Donald Trump was trying to follow, to pull the troops out of Syria, would not be continued, and that the troops will remain, and that, on the contrary, the United States is not going to abandon the Kurds to their fate, which is the way that those who oppose all attempts to pull troops out of Syria justify the presence of the troops there. And perhaps backing those promises, we learn that Hoey was also assuring the Kurds that the United States would work to broker a power-sharing agreement between the local Kurdish government and its political rivals in the Kurdistan National Council, which is a competing Kurdish group in conflict with the Kurdish authorities who are in control of this northeast region of Syria. Hoey also apparently promised $50 million in assistance, which has apparently been dispersed, and there will be more assistance of that nature promised beyond that. And I'm going to finish by quickly summing out how the State Department summed up the mission. They said that Hood underscored the US commitment to cooperation and coordination in the coalition to defeat ISIS, continued stability in northeastern Syria, and the delivery of stabilization assistance to liberated areas to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS. What are we to make of all of this? Well, first of all, we can disregard all the references to ISIS. ISIS has been defeated, not just in northeast Syria, but across Syria, principally, as it happens, by the armies of President Assad, of the Syrian government with which the United States is in conflict and which it has been seeking to overthrow ever since the protests began in Syria way back in 2011. So all these references to ISIS are rationalizations for keeping the troops there. Why is the United States keeping the troops in northeast Syria? Well, the short answer is to deny the resources of northeast Syria, its grain and oil, from the Assad government in Damascus. It's the United States, since last year, since the Trump administration imposed the so-called Caesar sanctions on Syria, has been trying to suffocate Syria economically in order to force the Assad government to negotiate with a view to getting President Assad to resign. In other words, the United States is now attempting through economic strangulation to achieve that which it failed to achieve on the battlefield, which is the resignation of President Assad and, in effect, regime change in Syria. There was another factor, however, which was also in play, which is that over the period of time of the Trump administration, the United States was also extracting oil from Syria. And the company that was doing that was a small US oil company called Delta Crescent Energy. Now, Delta Crescent Energy extracting oil in northeast Syria is contrary to the Caesar sanctions which the United States imposed on Syria. The Caesar sanctions, make it essentially illegal for US companies to operate businesses in Syria, and they do not distinguish between those parts of Syria which are actually controlled by the Syrian government and those parts of Syria which are controlled by other forces which either are hostile to the Syrian government or at least defy its authority, as the US-backed Kurds in northeast Syria do. And Delta Crescent Energy, extracting oil in northeast Syria, therefore seemed to go against the letter and spirit of the Caesar sanctions. However, the Trump administration granted Delta Crescent Energy a waiver which allowed it to continue to extract oil from the Syrian oil wells in northeast Syria, with part of the funding, part of the remittances from the profits of this oil trade going to the Kurds, to the Kurdish militia that the United States is backing in northeast Syria. Well, what happened is that waiver, that sanctions waiver, expired on 30th April, and the United States government refused to renew it. So the Delta Crescent Energy is no longer able to operate in northeast Syria, bringing in effect the US-backed oil trade to Syria, in northeast Syria, to a complete stop. Now, to be very clear, that does not mean that oil is not being any longer extracted in northeast Syria. Of course it is. The Kurds can operate oil wells, if only to a certain degree, and no doubt they're continuing to pump oil and to sell it on the black market. However, the proceeds that come from doing so are going to be significantly less than they would have been in terms of the profits, the share of the profits the Kurds would have received from Delta Crescent Energy's sale of oil legally on the open market. So this decision by the Biden administration to cancel, or rather to refuse to renew Delta Crescent Energy's waiver, is a major economic blow to the Kurds, and one has to wonder whether these financial disbursements that they're getting from the United States are going to compensate them for this economic loss. I'm going to add, by the way, that I know absolutely nothing at all about Delta Crescent Energy, but in the past, the United States government, or to be more precise, the CIA, has operated various shadow companies through which it's carried out its operations. It's created airlines, for example, and it would not be beyond its technical skills to create and operate oil companies in various regions in order to support, through funding, the people who operate in those regions and who are being backed by the United States. I am not saying that Delta Crescent Energy is such a CIA shell company. I have no information to the effect that it is. All I would say is that if it is such a company, that fact would not entirely surprise me. It's certainly a small company of which I know very little, and Al Monitor, the British-based media site that tracks events in the Middle East, refers to it as a little-known American oil company which is currently operating in northeast Syria. Can I stress again, this is speculation. If the executives or officials of Delta Crescent Energy want to contact us at the Duran and give assurances that their company, or rather give us information that their company is indeed independent from the US government, then they have my promise that I will circulate and publish that fact in a future video. But that's all I'm going to say about this at the moment. So that's the situation that we have. We have a cancellation of, or rather a refusal to renew a waiver granted to what Al Monitor calls a little-known oil company based in northeast Syria. And this followed by a US delegation headed by an Assistant Secretary of State going to northeast Syria and promising the Kurds that they're not going to be abandoned, and with some money being spread around to reassure the Kurds that all is well and that the United States continues to back them. So, what conclusions should we draw from this? Well, I don't know for a fact what is going on, but I'm going to make a few guesses, and they are informed guesses. The United States is saying, or rather the Biden administration is saying, that the reason it has not extended the waiver granted to Delta Crescent Energy is that it is because it is not interested in the oil, which is what the Trump administration said it was interested in, but it is interested in backing the people in northeast Syria. When I hear words like that, backing the people instead of backing the oil, my alarm bells ring. I would say that reassurances to the Kurds that the United States will never abandon them sound eerily similar to me to the many reassurances that have been given to people like the Afghan government, for example, in Kabul, that the United States would not abandon them, though in fact, as we see, it is currently in the process of doing precisely that as it pulls its troops out of Afghanistan. My own view is that this winding up of the activities of Delta Crescent Energy is indeed a first indicator that the Biden-Harris administration is reassessing the policy towards Syria, and that before long, just as has happened in Afghanistan, we will probably see a decision to pull out the troops from northeast Syria. This delegation, led by Hoey, was, I think, intended to calm Kurdish nerves preparatory to that decision being made. The Kurds would have been alarmed by the refusal to extend the waiver to Delta Crescent Energy. They would be worried that, in fact, the US is intending to pull out of northeast Syria. Hoey was sent to assure them that that was not the case and to sweeten the assurances with some money. But that is probably what is now on the cards. So, why do I think that? Well, first of all, obviously, as I've said, there's this decision to stop extracting oil from Syria, which, to be clear, is going to be a major economic blow to the Kurds. But also, there is the general reality of the changing situation in the Middle East. Firstly, the overarching story, as I have said, is of an American pullout from the Middle East. We've seen the United States pull out from Afghanistan. It seems to me that the United States is essentially doing the same thing with the Palestinian-Israeli crisis. As I've discussed in video after video, it's striking how passive the US role has been as that conflict over the last few days has played out. And it seems to me that the administration really does want to end US involvement in Syria so that it can focus on what it considers to be the primary challenge, which is containing China in the Pacific and in the South China Sea. The Middle East is far down on the list of its concerns and its priorities, and it basically wants to wind things down there. But beyond that story of general US disengagement from the Middle East, there is the actual moves that are happening on the ground. And here, the important event is the decision apparently taken by the Saudi government, though it is still not yet fully in effect, to reopen diplomatic relations with the Assad government in Damascus and to achieve some kind of rapprochement with Iran. Now, if that happens, if Saudi Arabia and Iran come to some kind of détente, a friendship, it seems to me, is out of the question, but a détente is possible, then it also seems to me that the days of US troops continuing to be based in Iraq, which has been the major point of contention, the major region of contention between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the days of those US troops remaining there are going to be numbered. The Iranians have been committed for some time to getting US troops to withdraw from Iraq, and all the indications are that the numbers of those troops is gradually dwindling as they face increasing harassment from Iranian-based Iraqi militias. If those troops are withdrawn from Iraq, then the position of the US troops in northeast Syria becomes in effect untenable. At that point, they have to be withdrawn, and the fact that the US's major ally in the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, is also working to rebuild relations with Syria, with the Assad government in Damascus, can only hasten that move. I did a recent video in which I explained that the Russians, by escorting Iranian oil tankers to Syria, by providing Syria with grain and food, have in effect, if not entirely nullified, at least to a very great extent, reduced the effectiveness of the Caesar sanctions, so that this policy that the United States has been following of trying to suffocate Syria is already failing. If the Saudis agree to re-establish diplomatic relations with Syria, and if Syria is readmitted to the Arab League, which now looks increasingly only a question of time, then politically, as well as strategically, the presence of US forces in Syria becomes untenable. The Syrians would be able to say that US troops are occupying illegally Arab land, and they would have the backing of the other Arab states in saying that. They would also be able to say that with Saudi Arabia wanting to re-establish diplomatic relations with Syria and possibly offering economic aid, the whole point of the Caesar sanctions has gone. At that point, President Assad will have indisputably won the Syrian war, and the continued presence of these US troops in northeast Syria and in that base at Al-Tanf will have gone. I think that the US government understands that, or at least some officials do. And I think that this decision to withdraw, or rather to fail to renew the waiver to Delta Crescent Energy, is the key signal that this is so, and that the US is preparing a final and conclusive withdrawal from northeast Syria, and probably and presumably also from its base at Al-Tanf. The reassurances that are being given to the Kurds are intended to make that withdrawal smoother and easier. But the Kurds should be extremely wary about taking those assurances as fact. One other person who, it seems to me, thinks very much as I do is the former US official in charge of policy in Syria under the Trump administration, Ambassador Jeffrey, who took an extremely hard line and who was seeking at all times to try to put the pressure on the Assad government in order to engineer its removal. Our monitor quotes Jeffrey as saying the following to them over the course of an interview. Syria is a black hole in this administration. Most of the policies from the Trump administration continue superficially. Keep troops in northeast Syria and Tanf. Support UN Security Council Resolution 2254 process. Sanctions stay in place. But there is neither a guiding strategy visible nor an envoy to execute it. And talks with the Russians stopped. Why? I can't explain it. It seems to me that the facts are fairly clear. In practice and in reality, the United States, the Biden administration, is no more interested in Syria than it is in Afghanistan or in the situation in Israel-Palestine. It is preparing the stage for a final withdrawal. It's not going to do it in the way that Trump repeatedly tried and failed to do by making an off-the-spur announcement, but it is paving the way for that to happen. Well, we will see whether I am right, but that, it seems to me, is the indication of things and the trajectory of travel. I suspect that we are now finally in the Syrian endgame, and that before very long, the war in Syria will be finally over, and President Assad will have won. Thank you very much for joining me for this program on this channel. I look forward to you joining me for future programs, both on this channel and on our main channel, The Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also remember to check out Alex's channel. You'll find links under this video. Please also check us out on our other platforms, BitChute, Odyssey, SuperU, and Locals. You find links under this video also. Please also remember to support us to the extent that you feel able and that you can via Patreon, Subscribestar and PayPal. Don't forget to go to our Discord server and also check out our shop and see the wonderful things that we have there. Our famous magic mugs, our t-shirts, our hats, our hoodies, our sweatshirts, and all the rest. Remember, by buying things in our shop, you become the owner of these wonderful things, and at the same time, you support the Duran. Last but not least, don't forget to press the like button if you like this video, and also check your subscription to this channel because, well, we've had several viewers contacting us and telling us that there have been some problems with their subscriptions. That's not something we have any control over. Please, however, make sure that you are subscribed to this channel if that's what you want to be. Thank you for joining me again for this program, and I look forward to you joining me on future programs, and have a wonderful day until then.